Happy Sunday, everybody. This is Mrs. Mayorga's garden. She's sitting out in the garden to read to you guys today. Enjoy.
Hi guys, it's a beautiful Sunday morning. The sun is just perfect, not too hot. And I thought this would be great to be able to be out here and enjoy nature, flowers, and also read my favorite book. Okay, yesterday we discovered that there's an onion field, and we also flashed back 100 years and talked about how Sam's onions cured Becca from food poisoning. Remember Hattie Parker? She was the one that pointed her bony finger and said, "God will punish you," when she witnessed the kiss between the teacher, Kate Barlow, and Sam, the onion man. Well, her husband's the butcher. And he's evidently not keeping things real clean in the butcher shop, because Mr. Pike, the owner of the general store, says, "I keep telling Jim he needs to wash his knives," said Mr. Pike, who owned the general store. Hattie Parker excused herself, then turned and quickly walked away. "Tell Becca that when she feels up to it, to come by the store for a piece of candy," said Mr. Pike. "Thank you, I'll do that." Before returning home, Mrs. Tennyson bought a dozen onions from Sam. She gave him a dime and told him to keep the change. "I don't take charity," Sam told her, "but if you want to buy a few extra onions for Mary Lou, I'm sure she'd appreciate it." "All right then," said Mrs. Tennyson, "give me my change in onions." Sam gave Mrs. Tennyson an additional 3 onions, and she fed them one at a time to Mary Lou. She laughed as the old donkey ate them out of her hand. We love Mary Lou.
And donkeys.
And donkeys,
Sorry.
exactly. Okay, and so now we're back in the present. Stanley and Zero slept off and on for the next 2 days, ate onions, all they wanted, and splashed dirty water into their mouths. In the late afternoon, Big Thumb gave them shade. Stanley tried to make the hole deeper, but he really needed the shovel. His efforts just seemed to stir up the mud and make the water dirtier. Zero was sleeping. He was still very sick and weak, but the sleep and the onions seemed to be doing him some good. Stanley was no longer afraid that he would die soon. Still, he didn't want to go for the shovel while Zero was asleep. He didn't want him to wake up and think he'd been deserted. He waited for Zero to open his eyes. "I think I'll go look for the shovel," Stanley said. "I'll wait here," Zero said feebly, as if he had any other choice. Weak, feeble. Stanley headed down the mountain. The sleep and the onions had done him a lot of good as well. He felt strong. It was fairly easy to follow the trail he had made 2 days earlier. There were a few places where he wasn't sure he was going the right way, but it just took a little bit of searching before he found the trail again. He went quite a ways down the mountain, but still didn't find the shovel. He looked back up toward the top of the mountain. He must have walked right past it, he thought. There was no way he could have carried Zero all the way up from here. Still, he headed downward, just in case. He came to a bare spot between 2 large patches of weeds and sat down to rest. Now he had definitely gone too far, he decided. He was tired out from walking down the hill. It would have been impossible to carry Zero up the hill from here, especially after walking all day with no food or water. The shovel must be buried in some weeds. How was he able to carry Zero all the way up that hill? That's what he's thinking. He was thinking he couldn't have done it. So, was there power from Big Thumb? Now he's having no trouble walking back down after eating just onions. Something's going on. Before starting back up, he took one last look around in all directions. He saw a large indentation in the weeds a little farther down the mountain. It didn't seem likely that the shovel could be there, but he'd already come this far. There, lying in some tall weeds, he found the shovel and the sack of jars. He was amazed. He wondered if the shovel and sack might have rolled down the hill, but none of the jars were broken, except the one which had broken earlier. And if they had rolled down the hill, it is doubtful that he would have found the sack and shovel side by side. On his way back up the mountain, Stanley had to sit down and rest several times. It was a long, hard climb. Chapter 41. Zero's condition continued to improve. Stanley slowly peeled an onion. He liked eating them one layer at a time. The water hole was now almost as large as the holes he had dug back in Camp Green Lake. Do you all remember how big those holes were? Jaden C size, right? About 5 feet deep, 5 feet wide when Jaden was laying down. Remember that? It contained almost 2 feet of murky water. Stanley had dug it all himself. Zero had offered to help, but Stanley thought it better for Zero to save his strength. It was a lot harder to dig in water than it was in a dry lake. Stanley was surprised that he himself hadn't gotten sick, either from the sploosh, the dirty water, or from living on onions. He used to get sick quite a lot back at home. Both boys were barefoot. They had washed their socks. All their clothes were very dirty, but their socks were definitely the worst. They didn't dip their socks into the hole, afraid to contaminate the water. Instead, they filled the jars and poured the water over their dirty socks. I didn't go to the homeless shelter very often, Zero said. Just if the weather was really bad. I'd have to find someone to pretend to be my mom. If I'd just gone by myself, they would have asked me a bunch of questions. If they'd found out I didn't have a mom, they would have made me a ward of the state. What's a ward of the state? Zero smiled. I don't know, but I didn't like the sound of it. Stanley remembered Mr. Pendanski telling the warden that Zero was a ward of the state. He wondered if Zero knew he'd become one. So a ward of the state means he's an orphan. He has no relatives. And that means the state of, in this case, Texas, or if it was California, takes care of you, basically by providing you either putting you in like a children's home or a foster home or something like that. But of course, Zero, no, he didn't want to do that. He spent his time outside and occasionally going into the homeless shelter if he could find someone to pretend to be his mom. I like sleeping outside, said Zero. I used to pretend I was a Cub Scout. I always wanted to be a Cub Scout. I'd see them at the park in their blue uniforms. I was never a Cub Scout, said Stanley. I wasn't good at social stuff like that. Kids made fun of me because I was fat. He's not fat anymore. I like the blue uniform, said Zero. Maybe I wouldn't have liked being a Cub Scout. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. My mother was once a Girl Scout, said Zero. I thought you said you didn't have a mother. Everybody has to have a mother. Well, yeah, I know that. She said she once won a prize for selling the most Girl Scout cookies, said Zero. She was real proud of that. Stanley peeled off another layer of his onion. Notice the symbolism there. Stanley is peeling off a layer of the onion, and Zero is revealing a layer of his story, like how he happened to get to Camp Green Lake. Very skillful writing by the author there. We always took what we needed, Zero said. When I was little, I didn't even know it was stealing. I don't remember when I found out, but we just took what we needed, never more. So when I saw the shoes on display in the shelter, I just reached in the glass case and took them. Clyde Livingston's shoes? Asked Stanley. I didn't know they were his. I just thought that they were somebody's old shoes. It was better to take someone's old shoes, I thought, than steal a pair of new ones. I didn't know they were famous. There was a sign, but of course, I couldn't read it. Then the next thing I know, everybody's making this big deal about how the shoes are missing. It was kind of funny in a way. The whole place is going crazy. There I was wearing the shoes, and everyone's running around saying, "What happened to the shoes? The shoes are gone." I just walked out the door. No one noticed me. When I got outside, I ran around the corner and immediately took off the shoes. I put them on top of a parked car. I remember they smelled really bad. Yeah, those were them, said Stanley. Did they fit you? Pretty much. Stanley remembered being surprised at Clyde Livingston's small shoe size. Stanley's shoes were bigger. Clyde Livingston had small, quick feet. Stanley's feet were big and slow. I should have just kept them, said Zero. I'd already made it out of the shelter and everything. I ended up getting arrested the next day when I tried to walk out of a shoe store with a new pair of sneakers. If I had just kept those old smelly sneakers, then neither of us would be here right now. We're going to stop there, and tomorrow we will be reading room 42, chapter 42 to room 72. Have a great Sunday. If you haven't seen this today, hopefully you're watching tomorrow. And chapter 42, more stuff is going to happen, of course. More mysteries to be revealed. Have a great day. Bye-bye.